Between 1971 and 1978, a research station in the Pskov Wetlands documented something that shouldn't exist in nature. Frogs with identical skin patterns. Not similar, identical. Down to the placement of individual spots, the exact configuration of pigment cells, patterns that repeated across multiple specimens with precision that exceeded biological probability by orders of magnitude. The official classification is anomalous population, exhibiting unexpected genetic uniformity. But read the field notes and you'll find something else. Researchers describing frogs whose skin patterns matched topographic maps of the surrounding wetlands. Frogs whose spots aligned with lakes, streams, and landmarks within a 5-kilometer radius. And when the landscape changed, when a new drainage canal was dug or a pond dried up, the frogs' skin patterns changed to match. By 1977, researchers were finding frogs whose patterns showed features that didn't exist yet. Roads that would be built months later. Buildings that were still in planning stages. The frogs were displaying maps of the future, and nobody could explain how amphibian skin was accessing information it had no mechanism to receive. The phenomenon was discovered in April 1971 by a graduate student named Alexei Baranov, conducting field research on amphibian populations for his thesis. He was cataloging marsh frogs in the Pskov Oblast wetlands when he noticed something unusual in his photographic documentation. His field notes from April 23rd described the observation. Photographed 6 specimens from different collection sites across a 3-kilometer area. Upon developing photographs, noticed striking similarity in dorsal spot patterns. Initially assumed this represented genetic relatedness. However, detailed comparison reveals patterns are not merely similar but essentially identical. Spot placement matches within millimeter accuracy across all specimens. Baranov assumed he had made an error, perhaps photographing the same frog multiple times by mistake. But his field tags were clear. Each specimen had been captured at a different location, marked, photographed, and released. The patterns were genuinely identical across different individuals. He documented this in his research journal. The probability of 6 unrelated frogs developing identical spot patterns through random genetic variation is astronomically low. Either these specimens share recent common ancestry, or some environmental factor is producing convergent pattern development. Neither explanation is satisfactory. His thesis advisor, Dr. Nina Lebedeva, reviewed the photographs and confirmed the observation. Her assessment from May 1971 noted, "Student Baranov has documented legitimate anomaly. The pattern uniformity exceeds what genetic relatedness would produce. Even identical twins show minor variations in spot placement. These specimens show no variation. Recommend expanded sampling to determine if this is localized phenomenon or represents broader population characteristic." Baranov conducted intensive sampling through summer 1971. He photographed more than 300 frogs across a 20-kilometer area of wetlands. The results, documented in his September 1971 field report, were even stranger than the initial finding. Expanded sampling reveals approximately 40% of marsh frog population exhibits identical or near-identical dorsal patterns. The remaining 60% show normal pattern variation. The uniform pattern frogs are not concentrated in specific areas but are distributed randomly across wetlands. More significantly, the uniform pattern is not constant across all affected frogs. Instead, there appear to be several distinct pattern types, each repeated exactly across multiple individuals. Dr. Lebedeva examined the pattern types and noticed something that changed the research direction entirely.
Upon detailed examination, the repeated pattern types are not random arrangements of spots. They exhibit structure. Specifically, they resemble cartographic representations. When oriented correctly and scaled appropriately, the spot patterns on affected frogs correspond to topographic features of the wetland environment. Large spots align with lakes and ponds. Linear arrangements of smaller spots correspond to streams and drainage channels. The frogs appear to be carrying maps of their habitat on their skin.
This observation was so unexpected that Dr. Lebedeva requested independent verification. A cartographer from the Pskov Regional Planning Office, Boris Shishkin, was brought in to analyze the patterns.
Comparison of frog spot patterns with regional topographic maps reveals clear correspondence. Pattern type designated A matches the northwest wetland section. Pattern type B matches the central wetland section. Pattern type C matches the eastern marsh complex. Scale is approximately 1 to 50,000. Accuracy is remarkable. Individual water bodies are represented with positional error of less than 100 meters at scale. This level of cartographic precision on biological tissue is unprecedented.
The finding was bizarre enough to warrant formal investigation. The Academy of Sciences established a research program in January 1972 to study the phenomenon systematically. Dr. Lebedeva was appointed director. The program was designated Project Cartographica and classified at low level, the kind of classification that meant we don't understand this and don't want to advertise that we don't understand this. The research team began with the basic question: how accurate were the maps? A surveyor named Dmitry Zotov conducted precise field measurements through spring 1972, comparing actual wetland geography with the patterns on affected frogs.
The correspondence between frog patterns and terrain is highly accurate for major features: lakes, ponds, permanent streams. These are represented correctly. However, the frog patterns also show features that do not appear on official maps. Small seasonal ponds that only exist during spring flooding. Unmarked drainage ditches. Abandoned channels. The frogs are displaying more complete maps than we possess officially.
This raised the question of information source. Maps require surveying, measurement, data compilation. How were frogs, creatures with simple nervous systems and no known capacity for spatial abstraction, generating accurate topographic representations?
Perhaps the frogs are not generating maps but are receiving them. Some environmental signal, electromagnetic, chemical, acoustic, might encode spatial information that the frog's developing skin cells interpret as pattern templates. We are observing the endpoint of an unknown biological communication system.
The team tested whether the patterns were fixed at development or changed over time. They marked juvenile frogs with emerging spot patterns and tracked them through maturation. A herpetologist named Irina Maslova documented the results in August 1972.
Juvenile frogs initially show indistinct spot patterns that crystallize over 6 to 8 weeks of development. Crucially, the final pattern does not always match the pattern present at marking. In 3 documented cases, frogs initially developing pattern type A completed development with pattern type B. The patterns are not genetically fixed, but are being influenced by environmental factors during skin development.
What environmental factors? The team monitored everything they could measure: water chemistry, electromagnetic fields, soil composition, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients. Nothing correlated with pattern development.
We have documented pattern formation but cannot identify the signal that determines which pattern forms. The frogs are receiving information we cannot detect with our instruments.
Dr. Lebedeva wrote in frustration in October 1972. The team attempted more invasive approaches. They isolated frog eggs in controlled environments, raising tadpoles in aquaria with no exposure to the wetlands. A developmental biologist named Konstantin Morozov supervised these experiments and reported in November 1972.
Tadpoles raised in complete isolation from wetland environment still develop cartographic spot patterns upon metamorphosis. Patterns match wetland topography, despite frogs never having contact with that environment. This eliminates direct environmental sensing as mechanism. The information is not being acquired during development through local signals. It is either genetically encoded or being transmitted through non-local means.
Genetic encoding was tested by examining parent-offspring pattern inheritance. Maslova documented in December 1972.
Breeding experiments show cartographic patterns are not inherited in Mendelian fashion. Offspring of pattern type A parents frequently develop pattern type B or pattern type C. Pattern development appears independent of parental genetics. Additionally, patterns can change within individuals' lifetime. We have documented 5 cases of adult frogs whose patterns shifted from one map type to another over a period of weeks. Skin cells are receiving updated information and responding by altering pigment distribution.
This was deeply anomalous. Adult amphibian skin doesn't normally undergo pattern reorganization. Once pigment cells establish their distribution, it remains fixed. Yet these frogs were rewriting their skin patterns in response to what? Dr. Lebedeva brought in a cellular biologist named Elena Volkova to examine the skin tissue microscopically. Her analysis from January 1973 found
chromatophore distribution in affected frogs shows unusual characteristics. Pigment cells are arranged in networks with higher connectivity than normal frog skin. Cell-to-cell contact is extensive. The tissue resembles a distributed sensor array rather than conventional dermal structure. When patterns shift, we observe coordinated migration of thousands of chromatophores moving in organized fashion to create new configurations.
Volkova proposed a mechanism.
Perhaps the chromatophore network functions as a kind of biological receiver. External information, encoded in some field or signal we cannot yet measure, impinges on the network skin cells. The cells respond collectively, organizing themselves to represent the information as visual pattern. The frogs are not generating maps consciously. Their skin is functioning as a display surface for information being broadcast from an unknown source.
This raised the question, what was the source? The team tested whether removing frogs from the wetlands affected their patterns. Transport experiments conducted in February 1973 showed frogs relocated to different regions maintain their original wetland patterns initially, but begin developing new patterns corresponding to their new location within 2 to 3 weeks. The pattern update suggests continuous information reception. The frogs are receiving location-specific spatial data regardless of where they physically are, then updating their skin displays to match their current environment. The frogs were not just displaying maps, they were receiving transmissions. But from where and why? Dr. Lebedeva found this result particularly troubling and wrote,
if the frogs can receive spatial information about environments they are not physically present in, the transmission mechanism is non-local. Information is flowing from landscape to frog skin without requiring proximity. This violates our understanding of biological information transfer, which requires either genetic encoding or direct sensory input. These frogs are accessing environmental data remotely.
Then, in November 1972, something changed that provided the first real evidence of mechanism. A construction crew began digging a new drainage canal through the eastern wetland section. The canal would alter water flow patterns and create new, permanent water features. Within 3 weeks of construction starting, researchers began finding frogs with modified patterns. Maslova documented,
Frogs in eastern section are developing spot patterns that include a linear feature corresponding to the new canal. The canal is still under construction. It is not yet a permanent water feature, yet the frogs are already displaying it on their skin patterns. They are mapping a landscape feature that exists only partially.
The team photographed affected frogs weekly as the canal construction continued. The patterns updated progressively. As the canal extended, the linear spot arrangement on the frogs extended correspondingly. Dr. Lebedeva noted, the frogs are not mapping the landscape as it exists. They are mapping the landscape as it is becoming. The patterns are predictive rather than merely representative. This was confirmed in March 1973, when the completed canal was compared to the frog patterns that had developed during construction. The correspondence was exact. The frogs had accurately displayed the final canal route before it was finished. More disturbing, some frogs showed the canal extending beyond the actual constructed endpoint. Dr. Lebedeva wrote,
Several specimens display spot patterns showing the canal continuing another 500 meters northeast from its actual terminus. We checked construction plans. The original design specified exactly this extended route. The extension was deleted for budget reasons before construction began. The frogs are displaying the planned route, not the constructed route.
How did amphibian skin cells access construction plans? The research team examined every conventional explanation. Perhaps workers discussed the plans within earshot of the wetlands, and somehow this information, no, that was absurd. Perhaps soil disturbance from planning surveys left chemical traces that, equally absurd. Every hypothesis collapsed under scrutiny. Dr. Lebedeva submitted a status report in May 1973 that acknowledged, we have eliminated all plausible mechanisms. We are left with implausible conclusion that frogs are accessing spatial information through means we cannot identify, possibly including information about planned but unexecuted landscape modifications. The phenomenon intensified through 1973 and 1974. More frogs displayed cartographic patterns. The maps became more detailed, showing increasingly fine features. Researchers found frogs whose patterns included individual trees, building outlines, even the footpaths created by human foot traffic through the wetlands. The scale of representation varied, but the accuracy remained consistently high. In August 1974, a researcher named Oleg Medvedev noticed something that elevated the phenomenon from anomaly to genuine threat. He was examining frogs collected from the northern wetland when he found a specimen whose pattern included a feature that didn't exist. A road. A paved road cutting through the wetland at a specific angle and location. No such road existed. No such road was planned.
The frog displays clear linear feature consistent with paved road infrastructure. Feature is approximately 3 centimeters long at specimen scale, corresponding to roughly 1.5 kilometers at environmental scale. No road exists at indicated location. No construction is scheduled. The pattern appears to be error or represents landscape feature that does not correspond to current reality.
3 months later, in November 1974, the Regional Planning Commission announced a new highway project. The proposed route cut through the northern wetland at exactly the angle and location the frog had displayed in August. The correspondence was exact. Dr. Lebedeva's report from December 1974 stated,
Frog specimen collected in August showed road feature that did not exist at time of collection. Proposed highway announced in November follows exact route displayed on frog pattern. Time interval 3 months. The specimen displayed future landscape modification before it was publicly announced.
The research team reviewed all archived frog photographs looking for other potential predictions. They found 17 cases where frogs displayed features that didn't exist when photographed, but appeared in the landscape within 6 months. A drainage ditch, a new pond, a cleared area, an access road. Each feature appeared on frog patterns before it appeared in reality. Dr. Lebedeva wrote,
The frogs are not mapping the present landscape. They are mapping the near future landscape, displaying modifications that will occur within approximately 6-month window.
Baranov, still working with the project, documented specific predictive cases in detail. His report from February 1975 described
Specimen 247, collected October 12, 1974, displays linear feature extending from existing forest road into previously unmarked wetland area. Feature suggests pathway or minor road. On January 8, 1975, logging operation began in that sector. Workers created access path following exact route shown on specimen pattern. Time from observation to realization, 88 days. Specimen 298, collected December 1974, shows circular cleared area in eastern marsh, approximately 50-meter diameter at scale. On March 15, 1975, helicopter landing pad was constructed at indicated location for geological survey operations. Time interval 104 days. Correspondence between predicted and actual features is typically within 5% spatial error.
The predictive accuracy was high enough that the team began using frogs as prospective survey tools. Before official planning documents were released, they could identify where construction would likely occur. Shishkin, the cartographer, found this both useful and deeply unsettling. He noted in March 1975,
We are using biological organisms as crystal balls. The frogs show us what will be built before architects have finalized plans. This suggests the future landscape state exists in some form that the frogs can access. Either decisions have already been made at levels we are not aware of, or the frogs are observing probability distributions and displaying the most likely outcomes.
The implications were staggering. The frogs weren't just mapping reality, they were mapping what was yet to come. The distinction mattered. If frogs showed only planned modifications, they were merely displaying leaked information through unknown channels. But if frogs showed probable futures that might not occur, they were doing something far stranger, observing potential realities and rendering the most likely version. The team designed experiments to test this. They identified frog-predicted features and attempted to prevent their realization through bureaucratic intervention.
Specimen 312 shows new pond formation in southwest sector. We investigated and found no plans for pond construction in that area. We issued recommendations against any excavation in that sector for ecological preservation reasons. Recommendations were officially accepted. The predicted pond should not occur.
Dr. Lebedeva described one such test in April 1975. She followed up in October 1975.
Despite recommendations and official acceptance, pond excavation proceeded in southwest sector in September. Heavy rains in August created flooding that undermined soil stability. Emergency drainage work required creating retention pond in exact location specimen 312 had indicated.
The pond was not planned, but became necessary due to circumstances that arose after our preventive recommendations. The frog pattern was correct despite our intervention. This suggested the predictions represented actual futures rather than merely human intentions. Even when plans were altered, the outcomes matched the frog patterns. The implications troubled the research team deeply. If frogs could see beyond human decision-making to actual landscape outcomes, they were observing something more fundamental than construction schedules. They were observing causal flow toward determined endpoints. This was information the Soviet state apparatus could not ignore. If frogs could predict construction projects, what else might they predict? In January 1975, the KGB assigned an officer to monitor the research. Colonel Viktor Surkov reviewed the findings and wrote in his assessment,
"The predictive capability demonstrated exceeds conventional intelligence gathering methods. Recommend elevated classification and investigation of potential strategic applications. If biological systems can access information about future landscape modifications, similar systems might access information about future military deployments, facility construction, or territorial changes."
Through 1975 and 1976, the team documented hundreds of cases of frogs displaying future landscape features. The accuracy was high, but not perfect. Approximately 70% of displayed features materialized as shown. The remaining 30% either didn't occur or occurred in modified form. Dr. Lebedeva analyzed the failed predictions and found a pattern. Features that depend on human decision-making show lower prediction accuracy. A planned road that gets canceled doesn't appear. A pond that gets filled in rather than drained shows incorrectly. The frogs appear to predict probable futures rather than certain futures. Their patterns represent likely landscape developments based on current trajectories, not fixed destinies. The research reached its disturbing climax in March 1977, when multiple frogs were found displaying identical patterns that showed a feature no one wanted to see. A large, irregular shape in the southern wetland, represented by a cluster of dark spots arranged in a roughly circular pattern. The size, at environmental scale, was approximately 200 meters diameter. The shape didn't correspond to any natural feature or planned construction. A biologist named Tatiana Utkina described it. The pattern suggests a dark or shadowed area. Not water. Water is represented differently. Not vegetation. Also distinct pattern type. This appears to represent destruction or devastation of some kind. An area where the landscape has been severely altered or damaged. The pattern suggests a dark or shadowed area. Not water. Water is represented differently. Not vegetation. Also distinct pattern type. This appears to represent destruction or devastation of some kind. An area where the landscape has been severely altered or damaged. The team monitored the southern wetland closely through spring and summer 1977. In August 1977, a fire started in nearby forest during a dry period. The fire spread to the wetland edge and burned a section of reed beds and marsh vegetation. The burned area, when measured, was 210 meters in diameter and located exactly where the frog patterns had indicated. The fire had not been predictable through normal means. It was caused by lightning strike during a brief storm. Yet the frogs had displayed it months in advance. After this incident, the research program's classification was elevated again. If the frogs could predict natural disasters, military planners wanted to know, could frogs predict troop movements, facility construction, border changes? The research became directed towards state security applications, and the scientific team lost control of the program direction. Dr. Lebedeva's final report as program director, submitted in November 1977, expressed deep reservations.
The phenomenon we are studying suggests that future landscape states somehow imprint on present biological systems through mechanisms we do not understand. The implications extend beyond amphibian biology into questions about causality, time, and information flow. We are using frogs as prediction tools without understanding what we are measuring or why it works. This is dangerous ground. Recommend caution in application of findings and continued fundamental research into mechanism.
Her recommendations were noted, but not followed. The program was transferred to military oversight in January 1978. The scientific team was reduced. Dr. Lebedeva was reassigned to conventional biology research. The frog collection was moved to a more secure facility. The final months of research under military direction remain heavily classified, but fragments suggest they were attempting to expand the prediction window and enhance pattern resolution. The program was abruptly terminated in June 1978. The official reason given was failure to achieve the reliable operational utility. Reading between lines of the declassified portions, it appears the frogs began displaying patterns that military planners found alarming. Predicted landscape modifications that suggested conflict, destruction, or territorial changes no one wanted to contemplate. Better to shut down the program than confront what the frogs were showing. The research station was closed. The frog population was not disturbed. You can't classify amphibians, but active monitoring ceased. Dr. Lebedeva's final communication on the project, a private letter to a colleague dated July 1978, reflected,
We studied frogs that could see the future written in landscape changes. We documented it. We used it. We never understood it. And when the frogs started showing us futures we didn't want to see, we stopped looking. But the frogs are still there, still carrying tomorrow's maps on their skin, still showing what's coming whether we observe it or not.
The wetlands remain, the frogs remain. And if you know what to look for, if you catch a marsh frog in the Pskov wetlands and examine its dorsal pattern carefully, you might see your neighborhood on its skin. You might see the road they'll build next year, the pond they'll drain, the fire that hasn't started yet. The future, written in spots on amphibian skin, waiting to unfold exactly as displayed. The frogs know what's coming. They've always known. They're mapped it precisely. And they're still there in the marsh, carrying tomorrow on their backs, showing anyone who looks what the landscape will become.